a chief programs officer. I'm a chief programs officer for TransCanWork. And the one thing that we do at TransCanWork is we educate all the corporate companies, and we also empower the trans job seekers in the workplace. So those are the things that I am focused on today. Thank you.
That sounds like incredibly important work, and I can't wait to hear more about it and how it applies to these different areas. Liz, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Osowiecki. I'm an educator and advocate for survivors of sexual violence and interpersonal violence. I have my master's degree in public policy, and I focus on improving civil rights for marginalized communities and survivors of violence. I'm a junior consultant at the National Center for Equity and Agency, so I work on assisting all sectors to improve their policies to create more inclusive policies for all people looking to improve their diversity and inclusion initiatives. I'm also a queer survivor of sexual violence and someone who feels very strongly and passionate about this issue. So thank you for having me on this panel today.
Awesome. Again, looking forward to hearing your perspectives and more about those intersectional identities as well. And certainly not least, but last on our panel is the amazing Zander. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Thank you, Dr. McGuire. Of course, happy to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation. And I'm glad to be also speaking with Celia and Liz. And thank you to EEONow. That's fantastic for the sponsorship. So a little bit about me. Let's talk about identities first. I'm first generation American. My family is from Mexico. I am neurodivergent. I learned that recently. I just thought I had ADHD and learning disabilities, but it turns out that there's a label for that, neurodivergent. I suffered a brain trauma as a child after the measles and mumps rubella vaccination. It was a viral brain infection, which is why I have some of the issues that I have physically and cognitively. Obviously, I rehab back from that, but that did impact a lot of my schooling growing up. I'm also a U.S. Coast Guard veteran. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a family caregiver. My 80-year-old father now has dementia, and I'm his only family member. Let's see. I didn't think to mention it, but now that Liz has mentioned something about her experience, I went through what's called conversion therapy as a 15-year-old while I was placed in a psychiatric institution by my family. So it's always something that people like to talk about. Currently, what I'm doing is I'm a wellness facilitator. I'm a conflict management trainer. I'm a speaker and an educator from the trans perspective, trans social care perspective, and also as a trans veteran. So I do a lot of speaking engagements, like say at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And I've been involved for the last 8 years with the National Association for Social Workers, National Committee for LGBT Issues. I chaired that for 2 years. I'm actually cycling off after those 8 years at the end of next month. So it's been a wonderful journey working with them. Thank you.
Awesome, wonderful, wonderful, incredible work. And I love how you all are in different sectors of this issue and really also bring to light how queer competency and inclusion is needed in so many different spaces than I think even a lot of people have awareness of. So to start that discussion, I'd love to talk a little bit about what this looks like in schools. We know right now, particularly I'm in Florida and throughout the country, there are lots of bills being passed, particularly against trans youth and their inclusion and their rights. And we see that bleeding into other sectors as well, but youth are dealing with so much. One, just being young people. Two, realizing their identities and coming out to themselves and their families. And then three, having to now face further legal marginalization. So I'd love to get your thoughts, starting with Celia, on what does LGBTQ inclusion in schools even look like? And what are some of the barriers that they're facing in getting there?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's so important because I always go back to my childhood days. When I was coming out, I was 4 years old. Having lived in India, which is a very conservative and a patriarchal society, I knew my gender wasn't aligning with my anatomy. at the time, and I had a lot of questions in my mind as to why I'm different. And that actually led to a lot of trauma. And I experienced gender dysphoria at a very early age. I told my mom, though my mom was a nurse, like what Xander was talking about, I was scared that I'll be put in a psychiatric ward. And I knew the consequences. And in India, it's even worse. They will even strap you to a bed for months together, and it's kind of worse. And I was thinking about all those in my mind as a child, and to me that was important. um, and I was also thinking about, the mental health barriers that I was going through. So there were thoughts of suicide. I've attempted suicide twice, and I've been publicly humiliated as a child when I was in my ninth grade. Like what Liz was sharing, I've also gone through uh, sexual abuse within my family members twice. And these are some of the traumas that we carry as a carry as a child. And especially when I think about our children here, the parents need to understand that this is not a lifestyle choice. A lot of times I hear this concept that you chose this lifestyle. We didn't choose this lifestyle. This is our life. And I always tell people that this is our life. 27% of the youth in California identify as gender non-binary, according to the Williams Institute that was published in 2019. So there's a lot of change happening in the society because the education is so important that's actually changing the framework of our society. Through education, everyone is looking at it from a lens, not just as a social cause, but also as a most important cause that needs to be incorporated in your school policies when you're going to the colleges, and also the entire ecosystem of getting a job, especially healthcare, homelessness. When you're talking about so many ecosystem around the TGI community, which I call it as transgender variant and intersex community, there's so much that needs to be done. And I would love to talk a little bit more in this panel discussion, but I've been in panels where I was in a room with people who are, when we are discussing about the policies of whether we should have a LGBTQ education, even in the school system, to that level, people were so opposed to that. And parents just stood up and said, I don't want my child to know about trans because they will become trans. And I was standing there thinking that, no, no. I mean, sometimes when you're in these conversations, even in City Hall, I've been in these conversations, the important thing that we need to do is education. And it's so important to bring up the fact that this is going to change the lives of not only of the children, but also the other children who are allies, and also the teachers and the parents who are so ignorant about it. So I just wanted to pause at that and listen to my colleagues here.
Yes, thank you for those thoughts. And I think you make also a great point talking about the college experience, how that is implied in school discussions, and that this begins with the way that we talk to pre-kindergartners and elementary school kids. Sometimes people might have a perception that this is only for older children or young adults, but this is across the board. Xander, do you have any thoughts on inclusion in general, and also as a therapist, why is this so vital to the psychosocial health of young people?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to say I don't work in the school, so I'm not very familiar, with that environment. But with working with young people and parents, not as a clinician actually, but more as an advocate and doing work in the community, and also research that's come out even more recently that family support is important. It's one of the most important factors because, and it doesn't have to be 100% support. So we don't need to give the message that, family members need to completely jump on board 100% and, start making the pride parade route or something, right? Like they just need to be supportive in the way that gives the message that they love their child, they embrace their child, and they're going to be there for their child, because it's the family support and the family acceptance that has a lot to do with whether that young person is going to start using illicit drugs or alcohol, abusing that, right? Starting nicotine usage, right? Like it has a factor on that. So sometimes we can go into environments where maybe there's some hostility, but if we have the resiliency from that family acceptance and family support, we'll be better able to withstand the majority of that. Not all of it, of course, we're not made out of steel, right? But then we know that we can go home and get support, you know, if things are going, and our parents can advocate for us. And so I just really want to emphasize for people to go to the Family Acceptance Project. It's an institute at San Francisco State University, and it's run by an LCSW, a lesbian identified Caitlin Ryan. And so Family Acceptance Project, they have wonderful resources. And in particular, they did a whole study looking at Latter-day Saints or Mormon families and their acceptance and how it impacted the youth. But there are a lot of different resources for people on what family acceptance does, how it matters significantly.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, and I think for schools in particular, they really also have a huge influence in that, whether teachers and administrators are encouraging parents to get involved with resources like that and to learn more and to understand their children, or if they're doing the opposite, they're affirming that, oh, this is just a phase, or this is something we don't have to worry about. I've worked as a teacher for a number of years in K-12 schools and seen the power of that influence, and also how teachers and administrators respond to students who are disclosing, just even questioning identities, much less if they have a label that they connect with. It's so important. And Liz, I know you graduated with your master's relatively recently, and so you were in the school experience as a student not too long ago. And so I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the student perspective and even maybe erasure that you experienced or faced throughout your academic career.
Yeah, thank you. I also, being a student, I did notice things like that. Even the fact that I am an educator now in the high schools, and I'm actually an educator in the community that I grew up in, even back in my own high school, talking to the youth. So I really do notice the way and the messaging that they're receiving in the schools, and the barriers we face getting into different schools to talk about these things. And the things that I noticed, yeah, definitely would be different as a cisgender white woman, and the way that I experienced the discrimination leads me to just realize I can't even imagine what other people do experience as a LGBTQ youth growing up, and just, you know, hearing the D word once and deciding that I will never disclose my identity to anyone, or even just being a taller athletic girl, and the way that these things were looked at negatively. And so what is so important, like Celia said, is that we are, this education is so important, and parents feeling that it's not important. We have to recognize that it's not that the kids are not getting education, they're getting the wrong type of education. So the fear that talking about it will make children gay, will turn children into a lifestyle, right? Realizing that they're getting that type of education. They're getting education that gay is bad, that gay is stupid, and gay is wrong. So we need to combat that education with proper education, informed education, inclusive education. So I definitely noticed those types of things still happening in the schools that I wish have progressed. But yes, going back in and realizing they are combative to what I have to say. They don't want to hear the ideas even about the trans community or gender nonconforming. These things almost scare youth. So to realize that there are also gay, lesbian, trans youth in those spaces that are receiving that type of education, that it's wrong. And so I definitely feel that having that type of education is so important. And as you also stated, it prevents sexual violence. We realize that these types of things, creating an environment where their individuals are looked at as less than, creates unsafe spaces, creates violent spaces. And so absolutely encouraging equality and those types of policies, creating where that education is necessary, because like we said, they're getting it no matter what. We have to just make sure they're receiving the right messages, receiving comprehensive sex ed. We know that the LGBTQ community is even more likely to develop STDs or to be exposed to those types of things. So ignoring it is obviously not going to work. So
Excellent points. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Sandra, you have some additional thoughts on this as well.
I just wanted to reiterate something Liz said. So there's a study that came out recently from Boston Children's Hospital, their gender clinic. And one thing they found is that the young people, it was longitudinal, they did it over the course of 2 years. And what they found was that the young people who had internalized transphobia were the ones most likely to have more mental health problems and substance use issues. So a lot of these messages that are coming from society, from school, from family, wherever they're coming from, the internet, they're getting internalized negatively. And so working on countering that message to make a more positive outlook internally than a negative one is really important too.
Exactly. It benefits everybody to create more inclusive environments. It's a deficit to no one. And on that note, I'd like to kind of move into the conversation of how this all translates in the workforce. And we're seeing more and more companies get on the diversity, equity, and inclusion train and saying this is something they're going to invest in. But a lot of times, queer inclusion is maybe a side note in that or left out of that. And a lot of organizations are still facing a lot of trepidation and fear around creating inclusive policies and really discussing some of the unconscious bias they have against LGBTQ employees in general. So I'd love to hear any thoughts you have on that. Liz, would you like to share any experiences you've kind of had or conclusions you've come to with what that would look like?
Yeah, I think it definitely transfers, right? If we create inclusive spaces in schools, we hope that that will transfer into the workforce, into our communities and all of our spaces. I think that that would look like creating policies that are inclusive, creating hiring policies that are inclusive. And like we said, as it's a deficit to no one, that these policies are things that create more opportunities for people and for businesses. Businesses have actually been denied by individuals because they feel that their culture is not inclusive. They feel that they are wouldn't be a comfortable place to work. So the way that it helps people who are in this community, the way that it helps all individuals as well as the businesses, and realizing that in the workforce, it's as people get older, it does become a little bit more like feeling like they have to come out, and feeling like people will say it feels like they're coming out every day because someone will ask you a microaggression about, how's your husband when you are identifying as a lesbian, asking different situations about your family that actually don't apply. So noticing those things, I think, is more common in the workplace. And I'll just mute till my phone stops ringing.
Awesome. Great points. Yes, there are so many microaggressions that go into this. And then the threat of, if you correct somebody, is this going to impact my employment and my livelihood? Celia, I'd love to hear any thoughts you have on both what businesses can do and the strengths that come with creating more inclusive workplaces.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a master's in computer science, and I've been working in the corporate industry for 23 years. And my largest P&L was 250 million. I was managing a large team across the globe with close to 800 to 1,000 people. But when I came out, I lost everything. Now, this is in a company where the corporate equality index is 100%. Now, where is the disparity here? So what I did was I did a lot of experiment and talked to these companies and asked them, what are your policies? Because you get your corporate equality index score, but are you really practicing it? You're just doing catch up. And so I was vocally challenging even my clients, and I started my own company, but I tried for a job as Celia at a senior director level for 6 months, and no one would hire me. In fact, the last company that I tried, they said that you have an amazing experience, but we can give you a job as a case manager. And I smiled and told them that I have built case manager businesses across the globe for $30 million. And you are giving me a job of a case manager just because I look different. And they said, no, it's not that. But, they were going into circles, and this was in a trans job fair. Where is the issue here? When you actually pinpoint the issue is basically that the companies have not really understood what is inclusivity, because they're just checking off these boxes. In my personal experience, I believe that change needs to happen right from the bathroom to the boardroom. And that is what is vital in these companies. And I talk about this in length with passion because a lot of times companies don't really get it. And they always want to do pink washing during June month. I have so many engagements during June month where they want me to be in the panels, they want me to speak. But I always told them that Pride 365 is important. Let's move it to August. Let's move it to September. And they were like, Celia, no, but we want to do this. We have this event now. And I've said, sorry, I can't. Why don't we move it later? And it was so important for me to challenge these companies because change comes from all levels in the company, not just from the company letterhead. And it's so important that it's not just the CEO's initiative, not your HR initiative, but across every level within the company. And that is what brings the change. And it's so important to incorporate these trainings when you have children coming from colleges and youth coming from colleges into these companies. I've also spoken about the internship programs. We have done internship programs with the USC, with the UCLA, and a few of these colleges where we want these interns to come and work with us and see how it is to experience the life of a trans person, not just trying to find a job, but also they don't even have clothes to wear for an interview because they've got kicked out. Just a couple of months back, I was talking to a trans person who's looking for a job, and this person had degree from Berkeley. You won't believe it. And I asked, why are you looking for a job in TransCanWork? And this person said, I want to work in a trans inclusive company. And I see so many companies out there putting all these pride flags, but I'm worried that do they really understand what is going on with the TGI community? So there is a big gap. There is a big disparity when you talk about all these things. And most importantly, I talk a lot about intersectionalities as well, because the future of the workforce, like Kimberly Crenshaw had mentioned in many of our conversations, that the future is not women, the future is actually intersectional identities. And this is such a beautiful statement to me because I believe that the millennials in 2025 are going to change the workforce. And if your company is not ready for it, you're going to miss out on the best talent in the world. And I not only tell the story in North America, but across the world because my heart is in India as well. And that's the country that I was discriminated, I was challenged. And so I've gone back to India and I've spoken about how companies can hire and change the perception about the cultural, I would say, misconception about the trans community. And they put you in this box called Hijra community. While I'm an educated person and I don't identify with the Hijra community, and I was always telling them that there are people like me who are invisible in India because they don't want to come out. And so I'm a strong advocate, not only in the community, but also in the companies, and also especially that I have a 15-year-old daughter. When I came out to her the first time, you know what she told me? Dad, I don't care about anything. I just love you. And she accepted me in 15 minutes. My wife took 17 years to accept me because she came from India. Her mind is still in that country where she has seen all this bias, and she wasn't able to accept a husband who has come out as trans. And so she was still battling with it. And now they both are my best allies. So I think it's so important for us to tell these wonderful stories that can happen in a family. As a family, we are advocates for change today.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's an incredible story and journey. And like you're saying, it all comes down to intersectionality. If we focus on one aspect, but not the commonalities that run through all levels of oppression and marginalization, we're completely missing the point. And also to bring these messages around throughout the year. I see that all the time. I mean, we have October with LGBTQ History Month, and then we have June with Pride Month. And I often say, well, where's the bridge that you're building between those two? So thank you for pointing that out. Zander, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Sure. I don't want to reiterate anything that's already been said just for time's sake, but what I'll do is I'll mention a couple of perhaps some resources that might be helpful. So about 13 years ago, I worked for an organization called Out and Equal Workplace Advocates. And so Out and Equal Workplace Advocates has a lot of resources, and they put on events throughout the year. One of the largest is their summit conference, Workplace Summit, which brings in thousands of employees from Fortune, probably 5,000 companies. All the ERG people, you know, the Employee Resource Group people come together to resource and share best practices. And so, you know, just as far as like the work that's being done on the ground and has been going on for many years. So I want to acknowledge that the future generations are going to pick up where the other generations left off. We can't forget that boomers and Gen Xers are the ones that established the ERGs, are the ones that work for domestic partner benefits in the workplaces, are the ones that, you know, started a lot of the diversity inclusion work that was LGBT specific. So as a Gen Xer, I don't want people to forget that our generation and previous generations started that work. And so we'll hand off to millennials and Generation Z. That's how I like to look at it, because they couldn't go where they're going if we hadn't started the track. So
very true, very true. We're getting to the end of our webinar today. So if anyone is listening in and would like to ask questions, please put that in the chat box, and we'll ask those as we conclude. And Liz, I know you have some additional thoughts as well that you want to touch on.
I just wanted to, what came to mind also is thinking about some of these things that are lacking in some of the policies, and bringing up the Fortune 500, 5,000, I don't even know what that means, honestly, those big companies, that many of them don't have policies for domestic partnerships, and many of them don't have paid parental leave for domestic partnerships. So just including those policies, like Celia said, from the bathroom to the boardroom. I love that, you know, creating spaces where there's gender neutral spaces, where there's inclusive spaces, but also the policies that affect families, like you said, making sure that those are LGBTQ inclusive as well.
All right, so we have one question, and then I would love to have everyone share where people can contact you, find you, and if they have further questions, how they can connect. The last question is, what is one thing that I can do, so this person's asking for them and for all people today, to create a more actionable allyship at my workplace? And let's see, Celia, would you like to start? And again, share how people can contact you.
Absolutely. So I love to answer the question by just taking the word allies and expanding on it. So it's much more easier to remember. A means acknowledge your privilege. L means listen to the community. Another L is learn to unlearn. I is to instigate tough conversations and decisions. E is to educate people around you and your community. And S is to be supportive by being involved. So that is the way you want to define your allyship. And probably it's much more easier to remember that way. So you can always contact us at TransCanWork.org. And we have a lot of job fairs, especially planned for this year. And we're going virtual now with all the COVID situation. So we are moving into technology as well, where when there's so much happening, we are trying to contact people and keep the job economical empowerment going. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for being part of this discussion. And Zander, your thoughts on allyship and how people can connect with you?
Absolutely, thank you. One of the components of allyship that I like to reinforce is the unlearning and the learning aspect, right? There's so much that is perpetuated in society through language, through policy, through law, through practice that is historical, that still is, even if the law is no longer in enforcement, there's still the historical social impact of that. And so there's a lot of unlearning we have to do as a result of whatever we were brought up in or around and how it's influenced our understanding of people. And the learning part is to go out there and just expose yourself year round, right? Go to an LGBT affirming church or temple or synagogue. Go to an LGBT film festival. Go to an LGBT center and participate, you know, in the audience of watching an event. There's things going on. Our community is vast, it's diverse, and it's all around the world. And so there's so many different ways that you can get involved. As far as how to reach me, probably my website or LinkedIn. So my website is just my name.net, zangerkeig.net. And then I'm on LinkedIn as well. That's my only social media right now. So.
Awesome, wonderful. Thank you so much for that. I love the idea of film festivals. Yes, that's such an engaging thing. I was actually filmed for a documentary yesterday on bisexuality, and I love seeing more and more discussions going in to the cinematic space. Liz,
absolutely, and reading books, right? There's so many books written by LGBT people. Read some books, yeah.
Exactly, podcasts, everything. Liz, how can people connect with you and your thoughts on allyship as well?
Yeah, I just absolutely agree that creating that proximity, creating that space where you can get to know people who are different from you. I know that, like I said, here on Long Island, that's something that people are really lacking, is getting out and experiencing other things other than their own identities. So I think that that definitely is really important, to be more open to that, to be more open to this type of education. And just like we said, creating those spaces where it becomes easy to talk about these things rather than something that people feel like they have to hide from everyone else. So I can be reached as well I'll give the email from Equity and Agency if that's okay. So we are here to serve at equityandagency.com. And that's where you can reach us for programming or anything else that you may need help with.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, we want to, again, thank everyone who's joined us today, who is watching, and for all of our incredible panelists. I'm so excited to see where these conversations go in the future. When we post this online, we'll also add all of those links for people to contact each of these amazing experts. And happy Pride Month, everyone. Thank you.
Happy Pride Month. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.